Prayers by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power derive, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberation of the Legislative Assembly, now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundation, for the glory of thy name, and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Premier, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Leader of the Opposition, Ministers of the Cabinet, ex-officio members, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. Honorable members, it's my fault this morning that we're starting late. Zena?
Sir. Administration oaths or affirmations.
Done.
Reading by the Honorable Speaker of messages and announcements. None. Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports.
None.
Questions to Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet. The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honourable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Culture. Sorry.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Question number 64.
Sorry. On member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask a question standing in my name on order paper number 64. Can the Honourable Minister say, how do landowners resolve disputes regarding the location of boundary markers? And B, which government department or authority is charged with determining the location of the boundary markers?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I believe I need to give way to the Honourable Premier for necessary suspensions. It's past 11, and the member has more than 3 questions on order paper.
Questions, suspension of standing orders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing order 23, 7, and 8 in order that questions may be taken after the hour of 11 o'clock.
Question is the standing orders be suspended to allow questions after the hour of 11 a.m. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Questions? Honorable Minister of Education, 1 minute, please. Honorable members, there are, I think, 4 questions for the elected member from Georgetown Central. And when we get to the 4th one, we will ask for the proper suspension at that time. Honorable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. The answer: a boundary mark can be a variety of things, from a tree, a fence post, a nail on a wall, or iron pin in a concrete, or a nab in concrete. Section 19(1) of the Register's Land Law 2018 revision states that every proprietor of land shall maintain in good order any feature which demarcate his boundaries. Most disputes occur when a landowner is not aware of the location of his boundaries, hence believes that they have lost land to neighbor. If the disagreement is between 2 private parties, it is a civil matter and can be pursued via the courts. Under Section 3 of the Land Register's Law 1996 revision, the Chief Surveyor shall direct and control all surveys. It is also important to note that under Section 15 of the Land Surveyor's Law 1996 revision, no person other than a licensed land surveyor may perform any survey which affects or may affect the definition of boundaries. A land surveyor can locate or re-establish the boundary marks so that the parties can identify their boundary markers. Section 18 of the Registered Land Law 2018 revision provides that the Registrar of Lands, in her discretion or based on an application from an interested person, may indicate on a filed plan the precise position of the boundaries of a parcel or any parts thereof. The Registrar of Lands shall give notice to the owners and occupiers of the land adjoining the boundaries in question of her intention to ascertain and fix the boundaries. Following giving all affected persons an opportunity to be heard, the Registrar of Land shall cause to be defined by survey the precise position of the boundaries in question, file a plan containing the necessary particulars, and make a note in the registrar that the boundaries have been fixed, and thereafter the plan shall be deemed to be accurately define the boundaries of the said parcel. The Land Surveyor's Law 1996 revision and the Registered Lands Law 2018 revision both include provisions which make it illegal to tamper with or destroy boundary markers or features offenses. Any person who, not being duly authorized to do so, willfully obliterates, removes, or damages the trigonometrical station, monument, survey, beacon, mark, or pole of any boundary, mark, affix, commits an offense under Section 19 of the Land Surveyor Law 1996 revision. Upon summary conviction, such person is subject to a fine of $500, imprisonment for 6 months, and the cost of repairing the damages. In addition to the above Section 19 of the Registered Land Law 2018 revision, it makes it clear that every proprietor of land shall maintain in good order any feature which demarcates his boundaries. Part B, answer to the question. The Chief Surveyor, who works on the Land and Surveys Department, has the statutory responsibility for all legal surveys performed in the Cayman Islands under Section 3 of the Land Surveyor Law 1996 revision. The Chief Surveyor is the authority on boundary matters. As part of the Chief Surveyor's responsibilities, he examines all cadastral surveys performed in these islands that will be registered to ensure that all the laws and regulations governing the profession have been duly met. He also ensures that the boundary definition is in agreement with historical records. Further, he confirms that the appropriate agreements to the boundaries have been obtained. Mr. Speaker, only land surveyors authorized under the Land Surveyor's Law 1996 revision are government surveyors working under the umbrella of the Chief Surveyor can submit surveys for authentication. While the government surveyors in Grand Cayman do not undertake private surveys, they would conduct the re-establishment of boundaries for Crown land when directed by the ministry. At this time, the government surveyors will find and place boundary markers in the ground to define the extent of the relevant parcels. On Cayman Brac and Little Cayman, persons may contact either a private surveyor from Grand Cayman or seek assistance from the government surveyor stationed on Cayman Brac. They both provide surveying services as required. It has been a long-established policy that government surveyors in Grand Cayman do not undertake private surveys, but due to the size and potential cost of utilizing a private surveyor on Cayman Brac and Little Cayman, the government surveyors do provide this necessary surveying services on these sister islands.
Supplementaries?
Thank
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the minister for her answer. Very comprehensive answer, I must say. Can the minister add or answer what the cost would be to a private landowner to relocate boundary markers if they were lost in some capacity in order to resolve a dispute? Because obviously we recognize the only authority to determine where those boundaries are is the Lands and Survey Department. But obviously in order to do that we need those professionals to come out and do that. What would be the cost of that to a private landowner?
Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish I could be more helpful to the honorable member, but unless it's Crown property, the government surveyors in Grand Cayman would not be carrying out this survey. It would lead to engage in a private surveyor, and I'm not privy to their schedule of fees. If the member wish, I can, through the survey department, see if I can ascertain what it is, but even then, it would be quite wide, as it would depend on the number of the boundaries that needs identification and whether it required a fixed or a general survey to be able to reestablish the boundaries. As all honorable members would be fully aware, when it comes to land in Cayman, it's a serious thing. So they have to make sure it's adequate, and there have been many land wars in the Grand Court and beyond the Grand Court. So it's really difficult for me to put an X factor figure in it.
Georgetown Central?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister also talked about tampering and the penalties for persons who are caught tampering with boundary markers. Can the minister say, has there been, within the last 5 or 10 years, or if she has any figures, of how many people have been prosecuted for such behavior of tampering with boundary markers?
The Honorable Minister of Education. The minister's consulting with staff. Give her a chance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank to the honourable member from Georgetown Central. I'm reliably informed that although they have been tampering with various landmarks, that the Lands and Survey Department has been able to successfully deal with those disputes as they arose, and hence there was no need to prosecute for tampering.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to kindly ask the minister to elaborate a little bit further, because as far as I understand, if you tamper, that's a criminal offense. So when you say they can resolve it without having to prosecute, explain what that means. And when you say resolve it, what do you mean? Is it a crime or is it a crime?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I'm reliably informed that all of the tampering to date has been deemed to have been accidental. For example, NRA with a bulldozer, or a private contractor with a bulldozer. Obviously, this is probably predating the cadastral survey days when we had some fistfights. We've become a little bit more mature as we've evolved in the process.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that was the response I was hoping for. One last supplementary from me, Mr. Speaker, and allow me to give you a little small preamble, but we all in this honorable House probably recall the recent disputes of a right-of-way and the District of West Bay. And
Honorable member, if you're talking about the matter with the former minister, that matter is being handled by the department, and it's presently under police because there are infractions, and I know there are complaints. It's not in my constituency, but it's in the District of West Bay. And I'm glad you did that to the extent that I can say that when it first arose, my dealings over the years, nearly 36 years, is that I allowed the department to do the negotiations, and when that didn't work out, we gazetted. And that's the process that is in right now. So when people are carrying on and saying all manner of evil and all sorts of things, the fact is that government did act. If the police service did not act, that's a different thing. But government, central government did act and several ministers know this because there were complaints to several ministers. To take it to the stage where it's being gazetted. I know that road is in existence over 50 years. I know that. But I allowed the government to do what the government do after their initial steps, and the government has started the process of gazetting the road, and I'm very mindful of the fact that I'm not supposed to speak, but it is the District of West Bay.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for that, and I take your candid advice, and rather than calling any district, I'm going to create a hypothetical scenario. And not to get into the specifics, I hope that I give no indication to that, but my fear is in any kind of dispute of right-of-ways, that the current structure of resolving that allows the environment for persons to become not happy with how it's being resolved because of the limitations of the Register of Lands and their decisions, because it has to go to court, to the point where people are potentially trying to harm each other. That should be something that is concerning for the way the process is determined whether somebody has a right of way. So my question is, Mr. Speaker, because I'm worried about the safety of one landowner trying to hurt another landowner, is the minister and this government making any considerations to make the process a little bit easier? And the foundation of that question comes from suggestions I've heard by professionals in the field to say that the ruling of the registrar in respect to what is determined to be a proper right-of-way should be enough for the police department to use as an enforcement order. What I understand, Mr. Speaker, is that the police department is saying that is not enough for them to enforce an action in respect to whatever that decision is. It still has to go to court. So ultimately, is the government considering making any changes to make it easier so we don't have these disputes?
So what is the supplementary question, honorable member?
A little bit patient.
You had your speech.
Is the government making any changes? I was about to finish it, but you interrupted me, Mr. Speaker. Is the government intending to make any changes to avoid the difficulties of that?
Thank you.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Honorable.
It's not the best of mornings, Honorable Minister, believe you me, but
we're alive and well. Give thanks. The answer, Mr. Speaker, is that the police will only get so engaged when there is a breach of one of the provisions. Besides that, once it's not Crown property, it's considered to be a civil matter. And if there's a dispute and there are economical hardships, there's a provision where they can apply for legal aid. Obviously, they'd have to prove that there is financial hardship. Besides that, the Lands and Survey Department will help when they can to try to resolve amicably the dispute. In addition, the ministry is currently looking at both the land surveyor's law and the resident land law to do a whole-scale revision. What I cannot do at this stage, because I think it would be premature, is to give in a commitment on behalf of the government that we will do X, Y, or Z, because it has to be from a holistic approach, keeping in mind that there needs to be a balance where many within the society, I would dare say, would not want so much power embodied in one particular person. We're a democratic person. We have a judiciary that, for the most part, is admired across the Caribbean, or jurisprudence that we have here. So we would want to know that there is levels of appeals, especially when it comes to the possession of land.
Elected member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister would consider the reintroduction of a policy that I know existed in the 70s and 80s, where government would have the Lands and Survey help assist people on some kind of a means test because of the high cost of the private surveyors and often the unavailability of private surveys.
Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Honourable Member from Northside. Mr. Speaker, the government will duly consider the request from the member from Northside, with the caveat that we would have to look at the resources available, because obviously there are more people now than when that policy existed, and it would also put more strain on our current complement of surveyors within the Lands and Survey Department, which means that we would have to hire more land surveyors. So it would have to be on the balance of those probabilities that I give the commitment.
We move on to the question 65.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask Honourable Minister of Education, Youth, Sports, Agriculture and Lands, question number 65.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the question standing my name on the order paper number 65. Can the Honourable Minister say whether all educational costs for children attending government schools are free?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the Honourable Member. The answer is no.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister say if that position or the policy position is in accordance with the constitutional obligations?
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that is yes.
Honourable Minister. Sorry, I didn't catch that myself.
The answer to that question, Mr. Speaker, is yes.
Elected member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, based on the answers of the minister, can I assume that the government is, by way of the minister, saying they do not have the available resources in their coffers to cover all of the fees associated with going to school? Because, Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, and I can read, every person who has a parent or legal guardian of a child shall be entitled to have his or her child. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, let me refer that I'm reading from the Cayman Islands Constitution, Order, Section 23. Every child who has a parent or legal guardian of a child, who is a parent, sorry. Yeah. Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. Ultimately, what I understand, and I'm happy if the minister can correct me, but my understanding as to the provisions in the Constitution is, as long as resources are available, and based on the government's suggestion of surplus, why can't we cover all the fees associated with children going to school?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps I would take this opportunity to elucidate members of Parliament by reading the complete section. Section 21 of our Constitution 2009, Mr. Speaker, reads as follows. Government shall seek reasonably to achieve the progressive realization within available resources of providing every child with primary and secondary education, which shall be subject to subsection 3B free. So, Mr. Speaker, before we get to it being free, we have to go through the hope of realization that it's progressive, so it does not mandate we do it all one time, and that into that progressive realization has to figure in the formula fiscal responsibility and priorities of other competing aspects of running a government within available resources. And yes, Mr. Speaker, although there are surpluses, we do not want to get back where we had to go to the UK at the 11th hour to get our budget passed. And it's for every child. We don't have no problem with every child. And Mr. Speaker, if I may put down the Constitution and now get back to the political aspect of responding, this government has to date now been providing, with the help of the opposition voting for our budgets and being very supportive to education, more resources to education than any other government before. And that's not for bragging rights. It just shows that it is progressive realization as funds become available to make it free for every child. And in fact, in 3 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, when we make our usual annual education speech, members will be more than pleased to see the progressive realization that has come from the original progressive government, now coalition government, and the provision thereof. Our students will be getting more than ever before, to not just say that we're doing it, but because we're an avid believer that our children is of paramount consideration, and we are going to resource it to the best of our ability. And I think we're doing that. Members, I believe, without fair contradiction, will be more than pleased when they see the announcement in a few weeks' time. And in fact, those of you who have been generously over the year supplying the school list and their supplies can now supply other items because of what government is doing. And in fact, we're also looking ahead and planning, and along with the concept of progressive realization, to look at the nutritional aspect in our schools, commencing with our primary schools, and without letting the cat out, watch the space for 4 weeks and do attend the education conference at Miller Hall.
Elected member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, Can the minister say what fees are not free?
Honorable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those who know me know that I come prepared. I am delighted to say that Caymanian students do not pay any school fees. They merely pay examination fees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, because I have been reliably informed that the member was consulting with the Leader of Opposition. I will be delighted to repeat the answer for his enlightenment. The answer, Mr. Speaker, Caymanians do not pay any school fees. However, Caymanians currently pay examination fees for students sitting external examinations only. Expatriate students pay $750 per year for primary school fees, and for secondary, years 7 to 9, pay $900 per year. Years 10 to 12, expatriates pay $1,200 per year. The examination fees is also paid by the expatriate students as well, and this is at the secondary stage. And in the spirit of elucidation, I would also wish to share with the honourable member that compared to other schools, the government is performing admirably when it comes to asking for fees to be paid. And yes, that's correct. There's no longer book fees, and we have already started the process of providing, Mr. Speaker, textbooks, and there's even more good news in that area in 4 weeks' time. Public schools, I've just went through and showed what they paid. Cayman International paid $13,300 to $19,200 from K to grade 8, where only our expatriates in public school pay $750. The lower secondary, Cayman International, paid $19,750, grade 9 to 12, and $20,130 from grade 11 to 12. Cayman Prep and High, $10,700 for reception to primary, $11,615 from 7 to 8, $12,300 from 10 to 11. Sixth form, $13,580. Catholic school, $9,084 for reception and primary through primary. Lower secondary, $10,508, that's year 7 to 11. And sixth form, $12,287. Triple C, $7,511 to $8,264 from kindergarten to grade 7. $8,264 to $10,065 from grade 8 to 12. So that, Mr. Speaker, provided for a comparative analysis that, yes, we have not reached that utopia of complete freeness across the spectrum, but when compared, it's just a nominal, a drop in the bucket compared to what the cost for government is, because we consider in education to be that important.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is my last supplementary question. And I appreciate the minister's contribution and answers. Can the minister say if she's aware of any provisions available to families, Caymanian families, that if they find themselves in that difficulty where they cannot afford to pay those examination fees, like say for instance the needs assessment unit per se, could assist in paying those fees, because we know we need those results in order for those young persons to go off into the work market. So though I acknowledge and I understand the government cannot pay for every single thing, but there are families out there who find themselves in that position, and the fact that they can't get those results hinders them from having the paperwork available to present if they go out to try to find a job.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, obviously, the Children and Family Services would do the necessary assessment, and if they fell within that financial indigent spectrum, there could be some assistance offered there. I also know that many of us within the Parliament have reached in our pockets deep and assisted students around the years, but I can also share with the Honourable House, and it's particularly the Minister from Georgetown Central, that maybe it was a test to see if the member was listening this time, but he is, so I congratulate you, member. That's a joke. Member from Central Georgetown, I have instructed my esteemed and most competent chief officer to look at that aspect of our children having to pay for examinations, because we're approaching education from a holistic perspective, and to give me a policy paper on that, which they've been duly working on amongst all the other curriculum things that we're doing. And if I would be so permitted to share, Mr. Speaker, why I am so convinced that we need to actually look at that very seriously and fund it if necessary, because standing before you is one of those such students. When I took my 9 O-levels, my parents didn't have the money to do it, and I actually went into daddy's cupboard and did unpardonable sin at age 15, took 2 bottles of liquor that he had in his cabinet and sold them to my grandfather to get my money for my examination fees. And I said that to say it's not illegal, it's not preferable, but it's not illegal. Member from Easton. But I've said that to say this, that there's probably no other member in here that feels that passion to ensure that every opportunity and accessibility is given to our children, in particular our Caymanian children. But because we are a service-generating jurisdiction, we have to extend that to every child here. Otherwise, they'll meet us somewhere else on the social spectrum.
The elected member for Buntown West to ask the Honourable Attorney General, ex officio member responsible for legal affairs. Question number 66.
The elected member for Buntown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question number 66, standing in my name. Can the Honourable Attorney General provide an update on the Consumer Protection and Guarantees Bill 2017? Thank you.
The Honourable the Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, the answer. The Law Reform Commission over time has been researching several issues relating to the introduction of consumer protection legislation in the Cayman Islands. This research, Mr. Speaker, resulted first in the preparation of a paper entitled Consumer Protection, Entrenching Consumer Supremacy in Cayman Islands Legislation, which was submitted for public consultation, and then the formulation of the Draft Consumer Protection and Guarantees Bill 2017. Mr. Speaker, the bill was submitted for stakeholder and public consultations in October 2017, with a deadline for receipt of comments set at January 2018. Mr. Speaker, in an effort to allow the fullest opportunity to provide comments on the bill, the Commission facilitated the request of several stakeholders to extend the consultation period. The last of such requests, Mr. Speaker, seeking a July 2018 submission. Over the consultation period, Mr. Speaker, the Commission has received comprehensive comments from members of the general public and professionals in the legal, financial, business, and academic fields, including the Cayman Islands Legal Practitioners Association and the Cayman Islands Institute of Professional Accountants. Mr. Speaker, the Commission, in keeping with its process, has been deliberating over the various comments and is currently revising the Draft Consumer Protection and Guarantees Bill 2017 along the lines of those submissions that have been agreed upon by the Commission. The ultimate goal of the Commission, Mr. Speaker, is to present to the government workable proposals which strike a balance between safeguarding the interest of the consumer in matters relating to the supply of goods and services and avoiding the important imposition of additional burdens on reputable business enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the Commission aims to have a revised draft bill available for another round of public consultation by October of 2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Elected member for Bodden Town Central. Sorry, Bodden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honorable Attorney General for that response. Just out of curiosity, Mr. Speaker, can the Honorable Attorney General tells us, and I'm just going by his answer here, he said that they had originally looking at a July 28 to extend the consultation period until July 2018, but now I'm understanding that we're now going to be looking at another round of public consultation by October 2019, which is pretty much a whole 15 months difference between the two, Mr. Speaker. I'm curious, Mr. Speaker, based on media reports, that there were some concerns by members of the business community. When can we realistically expect to have this draft bill before the Legislative Assembly so we can get some protection for consumers?
The Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, obviously the timeline for any draft bill to come to the Legislative Assembly will depend on a number of steps to be taken, including at some stage whether or not the Cabinet agrees to move forward and how to do so. But I can tell the Honourable Member his observation is correct in terms of the lengthy consultation periods, because, Mr. Speaker, what has been happening is a work in progress, and each time comments are made by several stakeholders, including Chamber of Commerce and others, the Commission tried to take those on board, reformulate the draft bill, and then submit again to see whether there are further input that stakeholders would like to make. But at some stage, I take the point, you will have to get to a stage where you draw a line under the consultation and then move to the other stage. But unfortunately, I'm not able to say when exactly we might be able to bring a bill to the House, because there are several steps to be taken before we get to that stage. Thank you.
The deputy leader of the opposition, a member for Bodden Town. Sorry, for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to let the Honorable Attorney General off the hook a little bit now, but has the government caucus or cabinet, the political directorate, have they assigned a priority to this legislation and moving it forward?
Honorable Member, I don't think the Attorney General can answer that question. If you were asking him about the caucus, he would not know. He don't attend caucus. If you ask him about cabinet, as I should help you, that's a different route, but certainly he don't attend caucus.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me refine that then. The political, any priority from the political directorate then, and that's it.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, at the moment, the initiative is a law reform initiative. It is being handled by the Law Reform Commission. And it will get to a stage where it will eventually get to, what's the word? Political directorate, where they would then be required to make a decision. But at the moment, it is really a law reform initiative that is being pursued.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Newlands,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, can the Honorable Attorney General say whether or not he's received any instructions from the Political Directorate attaching a priority to this legislation?
the Honorable the Attorney General.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, it is not the usual thing for me to be saying what sort of instructions I have from government. We don't usually retail those kind of, disseminate those kind of instructions in public. And so, yeah, I know. But he's asking me about the government. They only have one at a time.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the substantive answer, the Attorney General said that the ultimate goal was to look at striking a balance, safeguarding the interests of consumers in matters relating to the supply of goods and services and avoiding the imposition of additional burdens on reputable business enterprises. Now, Mr. Speaker, my question is, I wonder what additional burdens he could identify that would be an imposition on reputable businesses, because those, I believe, would be already protecting, if they're reputable, protecting consumers. Is it not the other way, that it is those who do not that a law would be instituted for?
Honorable Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, that's exactly the point. We have to ensure that you struck the proper balance, and the legislation, we have to get it right, so that whether inadvertently or otherwise, you don't have a situation where businesses that are reputable and are operating within the frameworks are subject to some sort of a burden, regulatory burden. It's difficult for me to stand here and sort of anticipate what those could be, but they are, Mr. Speaker, instances where they might be required to expend resources to cope with some of these sort of regulation that could flow from having consumer protection framework in place.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just one question. Can the Attorney General say whether the position paper, once completed, will be available for the public for review? Yeah.
Yes, Mr.
Attorney
Speaker.
General.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The Commission usually do a report, and in the fullness of time, the entire process will be open to the public, so they can have the benefit of what transpired.
The next question, please.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honourable Minister for Employment, Border Control, Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation and Maritime Affairs. Question number 67.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the question standing in my name and on the order paper for number 67. Can the Honourable Minister say when the government will finally intends to increase the minimum wage?
Honorable the Minister. Honorable the Premier. Question 60. Premier, before you answer. Premier, before you. Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as required by the law, the Ministry of Employment and Border Control is currently embarking on a national minimum wage review process. To assist with this, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee will be re-established to investigate and inquire into all matters related and make appropriate recommendations relating to minimum rates of wage, identify reforms to improve the process, and investigate if the minimum wage is still effective. Additionally, the Ministry is engaging the services of the International Labour Organization, ILO, as technical advisory services to assist with the minimum wage review process and establishing processes and systems for the Labour Management Unit of the Workforce Opportunities and Residency Cayman or Work Department. This process will also entail data analysis on the labour market, skills gap analysis, and labour market policies.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, can the minister say if he's aware as to how the civil service determines their minimum wage that they pay their employees?
Mr. Speaker, that is well outside my remit and knowledge, sir.
Mr. Speaker, can
the elected.
No.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister say if he's mindful or hopeful, or his government is hopeful, to get it in line with the civil service minimum pay?
The Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the establishment of minimum wage is not an arbitrary exercise. I have just read very carefully the processes that are involved in determining it. It is not something that you just click your finger and say, I think $8 an hour would be a good wage. There's a process involved. So it's not a question about where I or my government would like the minimum wage to be. The minimum wage will be established as the result of the carrying out of these processes and these surveys, because there is much more in terms of consequence to establishing a minimum wage than simply giving persons a higher minimum wage. You have to also consider the impact of that on the overall economy because of the costs, additional cost of that to the businesses that have to pay employees. So it is a technical exercise and a balancing one. We were the first government that succeeded in establishing a minimum wage. It had been fought for years and years and years with all sorts of fears being expressed about the terrible impact it was going to have on the economy. None of those have been borne out. But now the review process, the review process which is mandated in the current legislation is being activated again. And I expect that if that process is followed properly, as it was the last time, we'll get to the right result, where if the wage needs to be adjusted upwards, which my sort of general knowledge of this place tells me it probably does, it will be adjusted, but in a way that does not adversely impact the overall economy. So that is what my hope and expectation is, not a particular figure. That's not for me or my government to arbitrarily decide.
Elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Premier for that eloquent response.
Questions?
But I only ask a simple thing. Does he hope? And I asked him about the technicalities. I heard what he said when he answered the first time. Simple hope. Does he hope that it gets to that amount? Yes, do you hope? And you didn't answer that. But Mr. Speaker, I'll move on. Since he chooses not to answer it and tell the people, can he say when he expects the MWAC, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee, to come back with an established figure?
The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think I need to read the answer initially. The Ministry of Employment and Border Control is currently embarking in a national minimum wage review process. To assist with this, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee will be reestablished to investigate and inquire into all matters related and make appropriate recommendations relating to minimum rates of wage, identify reforms to improve the process, and investigate if the minimum wage is still effective. So we are, Mr. Speaker, just at the very early stages of this reestablishment process. So it will be for the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee to indicate, once they are established again, what the timetable is for them being able to produce the report. The last time they were incredibly efficient under the chairmanship of Mr. Lemuel Hurlston and did an excellent job in a relatively short time. I expect with the benefit of that experience, we should be able to be even more efficient this time around. But I'm not in a position at this point to say what any timetable would be.
I think we should move on. The member, last supplementary, the member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given that the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee, in its final report, said that they were being conservative with their recommendation, given that the cost of living has done nothing but go up since then, given that this government is about to embark on its budgetary process and approving a budget, two-year budget, does the honorable member not think that it would be sensible to establish a deadline in line with this upcoming budget session for a recommendation to come from the Minimum Wage Committee on a minimum wage?
The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the budget will come to this House at this point, the middle of October. It's simply not possible for that to be done in that time.
I said the last supplementary, but the Leader of
thank
the
you.
Opposition.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yeah, it's our day, so. Mr. Speaker, I note with interest the wording of the substantive answer. In particular, the Premier has said to make appropriate recommendations relating to minimum rates of wage. would the Premier not agree with me that the law provides that the committee recommend a minimum wage, not rates of wage?
Yes, Mr.
The
Speaker,
Honorable the Premier.
the Leader of the Opposition is right.
Question number 68.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 23-6 in order that the member for Georgetown Central may ask more than 3 questions in one sitting.
Question is that Standing Orders 23-6 be suspended in order for a member to ask more than 3 questions standing in his name. Therefore, the member for Georgetown Central is allowed to ask the 4th question. All in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The member for Georgetown Central.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honourable Minister of Employment, Border Control and Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation and Maritime Affairs. Question number 68.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper number 68. Can the Honourable Minister say if there is a classification, heading, or caption of healthy foods as per the customs law or customs tariff law or government policy? And if so, are there any planned further reductions or subsidies on import duties with respect to those items classified as healthy foods, healthy goods?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there is no classification, heading, or caption of healthy goods in the Customs and Border Control Law 2018 or the Customs Tariff Law 2017 revision. Sections 1 through 22 of the Customs Tariff Law provides for food items, beverages, and their products. The customs tariffs on such goods range from 0% for staples to 22% for the more, shall I call them, extravagant types of food, like lobster and top quality beef and things like that. In brief, the term healthy goods or healthy foods is relative and most often used as a marketing term to suggest health benefits or when consumed forms part of a healthy diet. Foods marketed as health foods may be part of one or more categories such as natural foods, organic foods, whole foods, vegetarian foods, or dietary supplements. However, the Customs Tariff Law does not classify goods under such categories.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to thank the Honourable Premier and this government for giving way and suspending the standing orders to allow me to have a 4th question. My question, can the Premier say whether this administration and this government is mindful to create such a category in the hopes to encourage or promote healthy importation and consumption of goods and foods?
The Honorable Attorney,
Mr. Speaker, I don't
Premier.
know. I don't know what in the current arrangement that we have. I don't know what purpose that would serve. I don't have the customs tariff schedule here with me, but it's a couple of inches thick because it itemizes each food. But the vast majority of food products attract zero duty. It is only, as I said, the really high-end stuff that attracts any duty at all. Certainly the staples, which I presume that the member from Georgetown Central is referring to, all of them are duty-free, entirely duty-free. Over the course of many administrations, the duties on foodstuffs have been taken off to a point now where even when we look to see what we can do to help, there is not much more that we can do unless we start to say, well, those who want to eat top sirloin and lobster and oysters shouldn't have to pay duties on those, because those sorts of things attract. But things that we chicken, fish, vegetables, fruit, all duty-free. So there's not really much that can be done, or nothing really would be achieved by classifying a set of foods into healthy foods, because most of them don't attract any, or virtually all of them don't attract any duty at all. So we'd have to rethink the whole system and start putting on duty on certain things in order to promote the use of the healthy ones, because at the moment just about all foodstuffs are duty-free.
the elected member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say this without trying to be in any way trying to undermine the Honorable Premier. But Mr. Speaker, I would invite this administration to do a review of things that can be considered healthy, because nor I or the Premier are nutritionists. So the assumption that most of the things that are considered healthy is already duty-free is the one that I think is not a good assumption to make. Mr. Speaker, we've heard in this Honorable House by the Minister in charge of Health about the severe obligations we will have due to the many types of illnesses that we have due to the consumption of bad foods by diabetes, heart attack, and so forth. And much of that has to do with how we eat. All I'm suggesting, Mr. Speaker, is that the government consider investigating, can there be initiatives available to encourage, by way of making it cheaper for persons to eat healthier. So I guess simply put, Mr. Speaker, I invite the government to investigate further.
The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize the little jam that the member has found himself in, because he doesn't want to say this, but I'm going to say what he's actually suggesting. What the member is suggesting can only be achieved by imposing a tariff on food which is considered to be less healthy, because there's nothing to take off. So it means that we're going to say foods which are fat-laden and have lots of cholesterol and the various known harmful components and are calorie-rich, calorie-laden, calorie-dense, that we should make it more expensive so people are less likely to purchase them. I am no nutritionist, but I have been involved in healthy eating and food all my life. So I do know a fair bit about those things. So if the member is suggesting that the government should, and this is not being facetious, that the government should look at because this has been done in other places, look at imposing an increased tariff or putting a tariff on sugar-laden drinks and foods, processed food, then if that's what he's proposing, then he should say so. And certainly in relation to the schools, it would get a lot of sympathy from me because we all see what is occurring there. But there is nothing to be achieved by going about it the way he's suggesting, because virtually all foodstuffs in Cayman are without a tariff, without any duty payable on them.
The elected member for Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say thanks to the minister for his suggestions and trying to make the listening and viewing audience believe that that's what I'm suggesting. All I'm suggesting, Mr. Speaker, is if we have to examine that as a possibility, then do so. Make the professionals in respect to the understanding of duty tariffs and the economists and the effect of the economy and the effect of our health, our healthy eating environment of our people, make that determination. If that is something that we would have to do for the better interest of this country, maybe we may have to consider that. But Mr. Speaker, if
your question now then.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier seems to be aware of every single healthy food has zero duties on it. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, he should provide the list of that, of all of those foods that are zero duties on it now.
Premier.
Mr. Speaker, all the member needs to do as a legislator is read the law. The schedule is there.
Statements by honorable ministers and members of the cabinet.
I have received statements from the Honorable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to advise honorable members of the performance of the Cayman Islands team at the 2019 Games in Gibraltar, which I had the privilege of attending in support of the team. I also wish to thank the Honorable Deputy Premier, his Chief Officer, and Mrs. Colonel for also attending and for their unwavering support. I further wish, Mr. Speaker, to thank the entire contingent of athletes, coaches, and managers, and to congratulate them for representing the Cayman Islands with class and professionalism. By way of background, Mr. Speaker, the Island Games is a multi-sport competition that is held every 2 years among island games with a population of up to 125,000 inhabitants at the time of its application. To compete, the islands must become members of the International Island Games Association. The Cayman Islands has been members since 1997, Mr. Speaker. The first games were held in the Isle of Man in 1985. It has been held every 2 years, and it is sponsored by NatWest International. There have been as many as 2,430 athletes at the Games in Jersey in 2015, and in Gibraltar this year, there were 1,624 athletes representing 22 islands. Mr. Speaker, more than 70 athletes represented the Cayman Islands at the 18th edition of NatWest International Island Games in Gibraltar, which took place from the 6th to the 12th of July, 2019. Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands competed in the following sports whilst there: athletics, basketball, beach volleyball, cycling, sailing, shooting, squash, swimming, table tennis, and tennis. I'm pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that on a whole, the Cayman Islands contingent representing our islands admirably and with the greatest level of professionalism. In short, our athletes were exemplary ambassadors for these beloved islands. Across the 6 days of competition, medals were won by the Cayman Islands athletes in 6 of the 10 sports they competed in, that is athletics, basketball, beach volleyball, shooting, squash, and swimming. A total of 30 medals, 11 gold, 10 silver, and 9 bronze were won by our athletes. This put the Cayman Islands in the 7th place on the medal table out of 22 at the Island Games. Mr. Speaker, I crave your indulgence to provide some additional detail on the Cayman Islands medals and performance as follows. In athletics, Lewis Gordon won gold in the men's high jump, with Carl Morgan winning the gold men's triple jump. Silver medals were won by Danica Lynn in the women's 100 meter, Javon Jackson in the men's 100 meter, Charlotte Brooks in the men's 400, and Carl Morgan in the men's long jump. Silver medals were also won by the men's 4x400 relay team, consisting of Javon Jackson, Kareem Murray, Michael Smichael, Charlotte Brooks, and the women's 4x100 relay team, also one consisting of Danica Lynn, Ija Lewis, Pearl Morgan, Daniel Bailey, and Anissa Owens also ran in the heat. The men's 4x100 relay team, Mr. Speaker, brought home bronze with the team of Kareem Murray, Javon Jackson, Carl Morgan, and Michael Smichael. Michael Smichael also achieved an individual bronze medal in the men's 800 meters, while Lewis Gordon gains bronze in the men's long jump. Basketball, Mr. Speaker. The men's basketball team won gold at the 2017 Games in Gotland, and as such, they were the defending champions at the 2019 Games. I am pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that a great team effort and spirited performance happened this year again, and it resulted in Cayman bringing home the gold for the basketball, an exciting final victory over Suriname. The Cayman Islands gold medal basket team consisted of Samuel Ogaro, Shad Ogaro, Davian Cottrell, Deirdre Simpson, Jake Whitaker, and I'm sure I'm going to slaughter this name, Niahwe General, Philip Webb, Joshua Ogaro, Tico Moore, Siobhan Ebanks, Aaron Taylor, and Kai Robinson Allard. A big thank you to the coaches, Ed, Trini, and Vote for a job well done. Mr. Speaker, the women's basketball team did not medal, but placed 5th out of 8 teams. They are a young, energetic team and played very well nonetheless. Thanks to Coach Wendy and the team, consisting of Dion Anglin, Melissa, Bridge Mohan, Simone Chin, Cortisha Ebanks, Leandra Forbes Morgan, and Stacey Ann Kelly, Yolanda Ebanks, Kylan O'Connor, Hannah Parchment Rogue, Michael Siegel, and Alicia Turner. In beach volleyball, Cayman had 2 teams, Mr. Speaker, in the women's beach volleyball competition. The team of Jessica Wolferdin and Stefina Golufi won a bronze medal, while Melissa Harrison and Eliane Powery from West Bay, I might add, Mr. Speaker, placed 7th. In the men's beach volleyball, a team of Richard Campbell and Nathan Dack placed 8th. Cycling, Michael Testore was unfortunately injured during a crash in the criterium race. Our prayers and best wishes go to him and wish him a most speedy recovery. In sailing, laser radial competitors did not medal, but Robert Jackson placed a credible 5th and Will Jackson 13th out of the 23 competitors. In shooting, Alex Savela garnered silver in the International Practical Shooting Confederation, ISPC, Standard Division, and went on to achieve bronze in the ISP Open Division. The Cayman Islands swimming team continued its traditional strong showing, Mr. Speaker, at the Island Games of 2 golds, 3 silvers, and 4 bronze medals. Gold medals were won by Jordan Crooks in the men's 100 freestyle, the women's 4x100 freestyle relay team, Kyra Rabis, Julian Crooks, Allison Jackson, and Avery Lambert got a bronze. The 4x50 mixed freestyle relay team of Jordan Crooks, Allison Jackson, Cole Morgan, and Kyra Rabes brought home the hardware, while Rhea Embury Brown earned silver medals in the women's 1500 and 800 freestyle events. Jordan Crooks, Mr. Speaker, won 3 out of the 4 bronze medals for the Cayman Islands in the pool in the men's 100 backstroke, 50 meters men's backstroke, and 50 meters freestyle. Alan Jackson earned an additional bronze in the women's 100-meter freestyle. Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands dominated, and I mean dominated, the squash court and swept all gold medals available in this competition. The team consisted of Elite Bridgman, Jade Pitcairn, Marlene West, Jake Kelly, Julian Jervis, and Cameron Stafford. Gold medals went to Marlene West in the women's single. Gold went to Cameron Stafford in the men's single. Gold went to Marlene West and Cameron in the mixed doubles, and gold also went to Elide Bridgman and Jade Pitcairn in the women's double, and Jake Kelly and Julian Jervis gold in the men's double. In tennis, Calum Teaker was the men's single consolation winner. William Wilkinson and Lauren Fullerton were the women's double consolation winners. Table tennis, the Cayman Islands gave a credible performance and placed 10th out of 13th. Mr. Speaker, there was a number of special moments at the 2019 Island Games that I would like to mention. It was of particular pleasure for the Deputy Premier and I to present medals to two Caymanian athletes in the long jump. Carl Morgan and Lewis Gordon in the men's long jump earned silver and bronze medals respectively. And the Honourable Premier and I had the pleasure of hearing the Cayman national anthem being played and seeing our flag being raised amongst hundreds of people there. It was also notable, Mr. Speaker, and special that Marlene West in squash and her daughter Kyra Rabis in swimming, being mother and daughter, were able to observe each other win gold medals at the Games. Cyclist Michael Testori, who placed at the back of the pack, was placed at the back of the pack of 47 cyclists, rapidly advanced to achieve a position of 23rd in the middle of the pack within minutes of the commencement of the criterium cycle event before colliding with an immobile race observer. He had to be taken to hospital and flown back home, Mr. Speaker, but I understand that he's recuperating well. The lone Cayman cyclist would have been, we believe, a very strong contender for the podium. Hurdler Javon Jackson tumbled during the qualifying heats in athletics and sustained an injury to his right heel, Mr. Speaker. Through sheer determination, the hurdler recovered rapidly, completed his heat satisfactory to advance, and despite his injuries, the 2 visits to the medical facilities for further examination, Javon was determined to qualify for the finals in 3 additional events. He ultimately achieved podium finishes with 2 silver medals and a bronze. On the night of our arrival, Mr. Speaker, and members ought to listen to this, the Island White contingent tweeted about 3 o'clock in the morning at their forecast demise of the Cayman Islands basketball and squash team. In fact, they referred to the Cayman Islands as trash. This, however, only served to motivate the Cayman Islands even more as their coach showed them the video time and time again, and in their pursuit for the gold medals, especially the men's basketball team. Young Kai Robinson, perhaps one of the shortest of the basketball players, Mr. Speaker, after having been pushed down by one of the competing basketball teams, got up from his feet, ran with much frustration, Mr. Speaker, got to the half line, shot the ball within minutes of the final few minutes, seconds, I beg your pardon, and got a 3-point score. And of course, this isn't my speech, but I'll tell you what, we started to sing as a Cayman contingent. And that's the way we do it, As demonstrated in some stories that I have shared, sports serve to bring our community together and to build national pride. The Island Games do not require team members to be Caymanian to compete. It only requires them to be resident here for a specific period, and they compete side by side, represent the Cayman Islands against international competition, and compete they did, Mr. Speaker. It also helps to build character in our athletes, many of whom dug very deep to rise to the occasion to defend the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable colleagues in Cabinet and honourable members in the House to congratulate all of the athletes who made up the Cayman Islands team from the various sporting disciplines for the way they conducted themselves as representative of these Cayman Islands. I thank them for their representation and offer special congratulations to the medal winners. I would also wish to congratulate the organizers, the president of the Island Games Association, Janet, for another successful Island Games for the Cayman Islands. I must also, Mr. Speaker, congratulate the parents and the sponsors without whom these athletes would not be able to access these international sporting opportunities. Mr. Speaker, members of the Honorable House will now be more aware of the recent successes and endeavors of the Cayman Islands Athletes 2019 Island Games, along with their accomplishments in several other major sporting events, namely 2019 Carifta Games, which the Cayman Islands hosted in Easter of this year, the 2019 Special Olympic Games, which was held in Abu Dhabi, as well as the successful football last week in the United States, where the Cayman team beat all of the competing teams in the United States. I stand before you today and invoke a strong sense of nationalism in recognizing and honoring and paying tribute to all of our athletes, the coaches, the parents, and their many supporters who have so ably represented these Cayman Islands internationally. In collaboration with the Office of the Premier, Mr. Speaker, I am also delighted to inform the honorable members of this House that tonight at 6 p.m. we will be hosting a special event at the Grand Ole House to celebrate our champions. I hope that all honorable members of this House and your spouses will be able to attend this event and join in the celebration with our champions this evening. The Ministry of Sports and the Cayman Islands government will continue to support and promote sports in these Cayman Islands, and we therefore look forward to the continued support of all honorable members of this Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, for your indulgence.
Without troubling the House to an extent, I want to add my appreciation to the Ministry of Sports and the entire Island Games contingent, because it was, I think, from what I understand, one of the best ones we've had.
Thank you to Mr. Speaker for being that advocate of sports and putting the sports complex in place, even though you had to do it through some quote-unquote creative methodologies. The chickens are coming home to roost, and they're actually laying some good golden eggs. So thank you, sir.
I think at this point we will take a suspension until 2:30.